On first impression, suspension stems might just seem like another cycling gimmick. But vibration test data coming out of the Cycling About Comfort Lab show they are shockingly effective at absorbing both big impacts and the small vibrations that come up from the road. Not only are suspension stems comfortable, but they are also lightweight, reliable, and able to fit any bike. I've even found them to be hugely beneficial on bikes with fat tyres. In this video, we will examine the advantages and disadvantages of suspension stems. I will then explain the different spring and linkage designs, and finally, I'll tell you about the best products available. I'll be lumping the Specialized Future Shock into this video too, as it functions very similarly. Let's start with the advantages of suspension stems when compared to rigid stems. Vibrations coming up from the road dissipate in your body, causing fatigue. This manifests as discomfort, including muscle soreness, hand numbness, and neck and shoulder pain. A suspension stem increases your comfort by removing a significant portion of these vibrations. Our tests with an accelerometer show a vibration reduction of up to 30% over a rigid stem. Keep in mind that vibration exposure is greater on longer rides, so the more time you spend on your bike, the more comfort you have to gain, and the fresher you will feel at the end of the day. Suspension stems also reduce the impact force on your hands. This means you don't need to grip your bars as tight over bumps, allowing for more effortless braking and control. These stems allow you to take a bike with narrower tyres on much rougher terrain than usual. Obviously, this isn't an ideal situation, but you'd be surprised how off-road you can go on 38mm tyres and a bit of stem compliance. A great thing about suspension stems is that they can fit all bikes. You can simply remove your rigid stem and swap one in. These stems might even make your bike faster. This is because they can absorb more of a bump, minimizing your upper body movement. Okay, let's now look at the advantages suspension stems offer over suspension forks. Suspension stems are often better than forks at absorbing the high-frequency vibration that you experience on fast gravel roads. This is because they require very little damping, which allows them to move virtually uninhibited over fast, repetitive bumps. They also require virtually no maintenance, and their performance doesn't deteriorate over time. In comparison, more complex suspension forks require regular servicing to ensure they function well. Suspension stems are lightweight, typically adding just 1 or 200 grams to a rigid bike, whereas a suspension fork often adds a full kilogram. At $100 to $300, suspension stems are a relatively cheap upgrade. Consider that good suspension forks start at $400 and max out at over $1,500. There is also no measurable loss in power transfer when you accelerate. Suspension forks, on the other hand, are stimulated on every pedal stroke, losing energy from the system. These stems are a notably aerodynamic way to achieve suspension on a bicycle. Round suspension fork legs simply don't slice through the air as effectively as a bladed fork. And lastly, swapping out a stem is much quicker than changing a fork. This is a useful advantage if you only need suspension on your bike very occasionally. With the advantages all laid out, suspension stems are looking pretty great. So what are the downsides? Most suspension stems bob up and down a bit while you ride. But given the 10 to 20mm range of motion, it's usually not a big deal. Suspension stems are not available in super short lengths. This is a packaging issue. The pivot must be between the steerer and the handlebar. Currently, the shortest stems available are 80mm long. And lastly, suspension stems are not exactly elegant, especially the highest performing models. But I suspect those who are sensitive to bike aesthetics are probably not watching this video. Let's now discuss the disadvantages when compared to a suspension fork. Over rough terrain, a suspension stem does not offer the same level of grip or bike stability as a suspension fork. This is because they use much less advanced dampers, they have much less tunability, and they only suspend your upper body rather than the entire front of your bike. They also have significantly less suspension travel, which means they cannot absorb as much energy after a bigger impact. As a result, suspension stems are simply no match when it comes to off-road performance. Now that you understand the advantages and disadvantages of these stems, it's time to get into the nitty-gritty of their design. But first, if you're after the perfect bike to pair with a suspension stem, why not check out my touring and bikepacking bike buyer's guides? These guides teach you everything you need to know about the bikes before allowing you to compare hundreds of bikes at the back of the books. The best bit is that they're updated yearly for free, so you'll always have the latest copy. Single pivot stems are the lightest, sleekest, and most simple design. These stems offer great performance as the internal spring is usually very responsive, resulting in great vibration damping on fast gravel roads. There are a few downsides, however. Firstly, the amount of leverage you apply to the spring is different depending on where you place your hands. This means that while the stem might feel supple in the brake hoods, it might be too stiff once you've moved to the bar tops or drops. Secondly, the distance your hands are forward of the pivot point determines the suspension travel. This design quirk means that those with shorter stems miss out on some travel. It also means that single pivot stems are best paired with drop bars, as your hands are far enough forward at the brake hoods to unlock the full suspension travel. Thirdly, these stems pivot in an arc, which results in your brake and shift levers tilting forward under compression. This characteristic feels a bit strange, but can be somewhat accounted for by tilting your handlebars up. And lastly, single pivot stems don't accommodate swept-back handlebars well. This is because your hands simply end up too close to the pivot point. A multi-pivot stem solves most of these issues. They require the same amount of force to activate them, no matter where you place your hands. In addition, all stem lengths offer the same amount of travel, the bar angle remains consistent under compression, and they suit swept-back handlebars. The downside is that these stems have 4 bearings, which might develop small amounts of play long-term. They also aren't that pretty and add some weight. Let's now look at the 2 different spring types. First up, we have coil springs. According to our tests, these springs consistently offer the highest level of comfort because they move up and down almost uninhibited. This very effectively smoothens out the high-frequency chatter you experience on fast gravel roads. The downside to a very active spring is that it can feel bouncy should you ride hard. It can also make your handlebars feel a bit disconnected from the ground below. Elastomer springs are the other option. These springs have more material damping, which not only makes them less bouncy overall, but gives them a better feel. While they can't match the high-frequency vibration damping of a coil spring, they are equally as good at absorbing bigger hits. A downside to elastomer springs is that they can firm up in below freezing conditions. That said, this is not considered significant until it's ridiculously cold. Redshift says that's at minus 40 degrees. Okay, you're almost an expert on suspension stems now, so let's take a close look at the best products available. I'm going to link through to some online stores below that will give the Cycling About channel a small commission on any sales. If you want to support this content, this is an excellent way to do so. The Kinekt stem is the most comfortable model we have tested for the Cycling About Comfort Lab. It uses a fast-moving coil spring with 20mm of travel and employs a multi-pivot layout so that you can get great performance no matter where you place your hands. This $189 stem comes with 3 spring rates to adjust to your body weight, riding style, and terrain. It's notably stiff torsionally and is available in an array of rises and lengths, including some super tall models for those looking for a bit more bar height. While it's a top performer, This stem can feel a bit bouncy and vague at times. It can also make a small knocking sound after it tops out after larger impacts. As a result, this stem is usually best for those with an upright riding position, or those who ride at a more relaxed speed. The Vecnum Freeqence is another multi-pivot stem with 20mm of travel. While it appears similar to the Kinekt, there are a few key differences. The Freeqence uses an elastomer spring that not only has the best feel of any stem, but it isn't ever bouncy. It even has 10mm of upward travel that essentially eliminates top out. These characteristics allow the stem to instantly fade into the background while you ride. One of the greatest things about the Freeqence is that you can adjust the spring rate for a 50 to 120 kilogram rider just by using an Allen key on the side. This is not quite an on-the-fly adjustment, but it's close enough. No other stem provides this easy adjustability. The Freeqence is also 40% lighter than the Kinekt stem. However, this pursuit of lightness can be to its detriment, as it has notably less torsional stiffness. This is most noticeable with a flat handlebar. The stem is also rather expensive due to the extensive machining and titanium axles, and I've found it to be less active than I'd like over fast repetitive bumps. Nonetheless, this stem has the least amount of compromises for my use, so this is what I'm currently using on my 5-year bike journey around Africa. The Redshift Elastomer stem is a proven performer, with a 23% reduction in vibrations compared to a regular stem. Christoph currently uses the Redshift as a comfort benchmark in our vibration tests. The ShockStop is a single pivot design, making it best suited to drop bar bikes where you can place your hands in the brake hoods. This stem is very stiff laterally, and it has a fast spring rate to damp high frequency vibration. It's very adjustable too. You get 5 different elastomers that will give you 15 different possible spring rates. Unlike other stems, you can run the Redshift with a positive or negative rise. That said, I didn't enjoy using the negative rise setup, as the direction of force coming from the ground is different from the stem's movement. The $189 Redshift comes in lengths from 80 to 120mm in both 1 1/8 and 1 1/4 inch sizes. There's also a high-rise version available in 2 lengths and a $249 Pro version that cuts 15% from the stem weight. Cane Creek offers a single pivot elastomer stem that's very similar to the Redshift, but this one comes with a soft to firm switch. When it's rough, run it unlocked, and when it's smooth, stiffen it up. A cool thing about this stem is that you don't need to compromise with the spring rate. In fact, you can use a softer spring than usual for rough roads and then stiffen it up at a moment's notice. The $199 Cane Creek is also available without the lockout switch, and both models are available in 80, 90 or 100mm lengths. Cane Creek makes it easy to change between the 3 spring rates. Undoing just 1 bolt allows you to swap the elastomers. The Redshift, on the other hand, requires you to remove the handlebar. Unfortunately, the Cane Creek can only be used in the negative orientation, which again is not optimal as the stem moves in a different direction from the ground forces. The last product I want to show you is the Specialized Future Shock, which is only available on Specialized gravel and road bikes. This 20mm travel suspension element uses a sensitive coil spring, just like the Kinekt stem, but it additionally has a hydraulic cartridge damper inside to control the spring speed. This product not only feels great, but it has a compression dial that allows you to quickly adjust the firmness from completely open to locked out. The reason why I wanted to include the Future Shock in this video is that it offers the most gravel road comfort of any suspension products we've tested, and that includes suspension forks too. On a bumpy forest trail, the Future Shock attenuated 6% more vibrations than a bike fitted with both a LULF suspension fork and a Redshift suspension stem. And on a fast gravel road, the Future Shock absorbed almost 20% more vibrations. This is an amazing result given we already know the Redshift stem is leaps and bounds more comfortable than a rigid stem. We've so far found the FutureShock to be the holy grail in terms of performance, adjustability, lockout, and aesthetics. And a bonus feature is that it can fit stems shorter than 80mm. But the downside to this high-tech solution is that it's only available on some specialised bikes, and the complexity results in more servicing requirements, potential points of failure, and in the future, the inability to obtain spare parts. Let's finish up with a few quick frequently asked questions. Can you combine suspension forks and suspension stems? These stems only deflect 10 to 20mm, so this movement will have a minimal effect on the handling of a bike with a suspension fork. If you want better vibration damping on fast gravel roads, or you feel the need for a small boost in travel, a suspension stem would do that for you. Can you use front luggage with suspension stems? You can definitely use a front bag like me, you just need to compensate by using a stiffer spring. Do suspension stems work on a quill stem bike? They sure do, you can fit them with an adapter. Are there any stems under $100? You can find generic coil spring multi-pivot stems sold under many names. These stems are not the best choice if you're planning on riding hard, as they tend to top and bottom out on rough terrain, making clunking sounds. But if your riding position is upright and your riding style is relaxed, they should offer decent performance. Just note that there is only a single length available. The Transx Anti-Shock is another cheap stem. However, this model has been lab tested to be ineffective, so I'd recommend skipping it. What suspension seat post should you pair with a suspension stem? I made a video all about suspension seat post designs too. Make sure to watch that video after this to find out. I originally expected suspension stems to be a gimmick, but ultimately, I've found them to increase the fun and enjoyment of cycling by way of a comfort boost, and I really appreciate that on longer rides. As a result, I can only recommend you try one. There are trade-offs to Coil and Elastomer springs, as well as single pivot and multi-pivot stem designs. Make sure to carefully examine the pros and cons of each design to find the product that best suits your needs.